The day I checked my bank account and saw $0, I knew my mom had stolen everything I saved for college. I'm Ava, and that moment changed my life. I didn't scream. I walked away. And what happened next? Even she didn't see coming. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you? Let me know in the comment. There wasn't even a candle. Just a half-eaten pumpkin pie on a chipped dinner plate and the scent of reheated leftovers floating through the house. "Happy birthday," Mom said, setting the plate on the counter without looking at me. She was already halfway back to the kitchen sink, sleeves pushed up, scrubbing something invisible on a pan. I stood there for a second, not sure if I was supposed to thank her or laugh. The crust had collapsed on one side, and the filling had that fridge film look, like it had been sitting out too long or put away too fast. I looked around the kitchen. No decorations, no cards, no make-a-wish. Just the hum of the dishwasher and the buzz of the overhead light. I took the pie and sat down at the edge of the table, slicing off a piece with the side of my fork. It was cold. That was fall of 2015, the year the trees outside our Spokane house turned gold early, and I turned 16 quietly. The house still smelled like cinnamon most days, because Mom burned the same candle every afternoon. She said it made the place feel cozy. I wondered if it fooled her the way it no longer fooled me. Everything had started shifting a few months before, when Mom met Gary. He was charming in that salesman sort of way. Clean jeans, smooth talker, always laughing too loud at his own jokes. He worked in insurance, or maybe sold windows? I never quite caught the detail. What mattered more was how fast he went from new guy at dinner to man of the house. The first few times Gary came over, he brought things. A bottle of red wine for Mom, a bag of caramel popcorn for Kaylee, his daughter. A keychain flashlight for Eli, his son. For me, I got a, "Hey there, kiddo," and a nod. He was careful around Mom, deferential even. He'd pull out her chair or compliment her cooking with lines like, "Best meatloaf north of the Columbia." She'd beam like she was 17 again. I didn't mind at first. I'd seen her go on a few dates over the years, but this one felt different. He stuck around. Within weeks, Gary was dropping by every evening. Within 2 months, his kids were over on weekends. And before Halloween, they had moved in, suitcases, gadgets, throw pillows, and all. I came home from school one day, and the hallway smelled different, more like Axe body spray and less like cinnamon. Kaylee's laugh rang from the living room where she and Mom were painting their nails. Eli had taken over the den with some sort of Nerf armory. Gary's boots were by the door. My shoes had been shoved aside. That was when routines started to shift. Dinner became later, louder. Family game night was mandatory. "Ava, smile," Mom would say, pointing her phone at us. "For once." It's strange how quickly a home can stop feeling like yours. Still, I tried. I cleaned up after meals. I offered to help Kaylee with math. I even laughed at one of Gary's jokes once. But no one noticed. And then came my birthday. 16. I'd imagined it differently. Maybe not a party like Kaylee's sweet 16 that came later. With a DJ, cake tower, and rented tent in the backyard. But at least something. A card. Balloons. A mention. But there was just that pie. Half-eaten. Later that evening, I walked past the den and heard music. Kaylee was curled up on the couch, Gary's arm slung over the backrest, Mom beside him. They were flipping through family photos on the TV screen, ones taken recently. One photo stopped me cold. There they were, all 4 of them, standing in the backyard, smiling like a magazine ad. Eli was holding the dog. Kaylee had on a new sweater I'd never seen. Mom's hand was resting lightly on Gary's chest. Everyone was lit by golden hour. I wasn't in the photo. I wasn't even home that day. I leaned against the wall, hidden just out of view, listening to their laughter. Then I heard her say it. "She's strong. She'll understand." It wasn't cruel. She didn't sound angry. If anything, it was said like a justification. And maybe that's what hurt most, that she believed it, that being strong meant being invisible, that I didn't need anything, not even acknowledgement. Later that night, I went downstairs to the kitchen. The house was quiet. Only the hum of the fridge. The pie was still on the counter, drying out under its plastic wrap. I unwrapped it, cut a slice, and threw it into the trash. Then another, and the next, until only the empty dish remained. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I just didn't want anyone else to finish what no one had started. Not this year. I turned off the kitchen light and stood there for a moment, letting the dark settle. From the staircase, I could see the faint glow of the TV upstairs. Laughter floated down, Kaylee's voice sharp and clear. Then caramel. That sticky, warm smell. Gary must have brought over more popcorn. I watched as he tossed the bag to Kaylee, who squealed and dug in. No one called me. No one looked down the stairs. So I watched, and I waited, and then I turned around, walked back to my room, and shut the door with the softest click I could manage. Kaylee needs quiet to focus, Mom said, arms crossed, her eyes already scanning the hallway like the decision had been made long before I got home. I stood by the stairs, holding a grocery bag with the bread I'd gone out to get. So, what does that mean? She exhaled, like I was the one being unreasonable. Your room has the best light. It's bigger. It'll help her concentrate. I glanced up at the second floor, where my room, my sanctuary for the last 10 years, had faded into someone else's future. It wasn't even a conversation. It was an announcement. By the following weekend, the transformation had begun. Kaylee's new desk was delivered, white, glossy, with drawers that slid out silently. A plush chair followed, pale pink with gold wheels. Gary assembled it all with that same upbeat whistling he used when fixing things that didn't need fixing. Kaylee picked out wall decals with stars and soft pastels. My old posters were in the trash before I could ask for them back. They gave me the storage room. It wasn't technically a bedroom. It had no closet, one small window, with a view of the neighbor's fence and a faint scent of detergent that never quite went away. The room was next to the laundry machines. Every Tuesday and Friday night, I'd fall asleep to the rhythm of tumbling towels. My bed barely fit. The dresser we moved in bumped up against the door every time I tried to open it. I stacked my books in shoeboxes and made a nightstand out of an old crate. No one offered to help decorate. No one asked if I was okay. I didn't complain. Not because I wasn't angry, I was, but because I knew it wouldn't change anything. My words didn't hold much weight in the house anymore. What made it worse wasn't the physical space. It was what the space symbolized. For years, I'd begged Mom for piano lessons. Every birthday, every Christmas. She always said the same thing. We can't afford it right now, honey. Maybe next year. Now I walked past Kaylee's room, my old room, and saw noise-canceling headphones on her desk, a Bluetooth speaker by her bed, and a keyboard with light-up keys she barely touched. When I stopped in the doorway once, curious, she shrugged and said, I might try learning chords, but it's mostly for vibes. I remember swallowing something sharp that day. Not words, those had already been buried, but a kind of quiet disbelief. How easy it was for someone else to receive what I'd only dreamed of. How invisible my wanting had become. Outside the house, the world kept spinning. It was spring in Spokane, which meant soft sun in the mornings and the smell of blooming dogwoods along the sidewalks. At school, kids talked about summer camps and lake trips. I walked home most days with my headphones in and volume low, just enough to drown out the static. To feel useful, I took a job at a cafe 2 blocks from the library. The pay wasn't great, but they let me take leftover pastries at night. I tucked tips into a mason jar I'd labeled in Sharpie. Anywhere but here. Sometimes I'd stand behind the counter, wiping mugs, watching people sit with their laptops or talk over lemon scones. They looked like they had somewhere to be. People waiting for them. Plans that mattered. I wondered what that felt like. At home, it was more of the same. One night, I came back from the cafe, my apron still smelling like burnt espresso and vanilla. As I walked past the stairs, I heard Kaylee laughing behind the door of my old room. Music thumped, some pop remix I didn't recognize. Her voice echoed off the walls. She was on video chat, probably dancing, maybe filming a TikTok. I paused by the door. Through the sliver of light underneath, I could see the glow of her ring light against the carpet. The same carpet I'd once laid on, writing in my journal, listening to the same playlist over and over. The door creaked as I stepped away. I didn't want her to think I was listening, even though I was. Even though I always was. The next afternoon, while helping Mom carry in groceries, I heard Kaylee say from the kitchen table, "I could never sleep in that closet Ava's in now." She laughed. So did Gary. Mom didn't say anything. I looked down at the bag of apples in my hands and felt something shift, not snap. Just shift. Like something small inside had moved off center, and I wasn't sure it would go back. That night, in the small dark room that didn't smell like cinnamon, I pressed my ear to the wall between us. I listened to Kaylee's voice rising and falling, her music changing every few seconds. I caught snippets of her giggles, the sound of her tapping on her phone screen, maybe sending emojis or likes or comments that would make her feel seen. And I realized this wall wasn't thick. She couldn't hear me, but I could hear her. It was like being haunted by a life that used to be mine. I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling. It had a small crack that reminded me of a wishbone. I used to think wishbones granted you something if you pulled hard enough. Now I just hoped the ceiling wouldn't fall. It was supposed to be a good day. I'd just finished a double shift at the cafe, tips tucked into my back pocket, hair smelling like mocha and fryer grease. Graduation had been the week before, and while there wasn't a big celebration, I felt something close to pride when I looked at the wrinkled cap and gown hanging over the chair in my tiny room. That night, before bed, I opened the bank app on my phone. It had become a habit, refreshing the page, watching the number slowly grow. The last time I checked, the balance read $6,500. Not a fortune, but mine. Every dollar from cafe shifts, babysitting Mrs. Coleman's twins down the street, and tutoring 7th grade algebra. It was my college fund, my future, my escape. But that night, the screen stared back blank. Balance, $0.00. For a second, I thought it was a glitch. I closed the app, reopened it, closed it again. I even turned my phone off and back on, like some kind of financial CPR might revive it. Still zero. My breath caught, my fingers felt numb, and the room suddenly seemed smaller than it already was. The next morning, I walked to the bank. The teller, a woman about my mom's age, with cropped gray hair and gentle eyes, clicked through the records, her brows furrowing. "There were 2 withdrawals last week," she said. "One in person, one electronic, both authorized under a joint account." "Joint?" I echoed, though I already knew. "The secondary on the account," she said, tapping her screen. "Diane Mercer?" I swallowed hard. "Thanks," I managed. My voice sounded distant, like I was speaking through fog. I didn't go home right away. I sat on the steps outside the library, staring at the sidewalk as kids rode by on bikes, their laughter bouncing off the pavement. It was the kind of day that would have felt free under different circumstances. But the only thing I felt was weight. By the time I walked through the front door, Mom was folding laundry on the couch. A commercial hummed from the TV, something about back-to-school sales. "I checked my account," I said quietly. She didn't even look up. "Yeah? You took it." She nodded, still smoothing a towel. "Rick's kids start school soon. They needed laptops and new shoes." I stood frozen. "That money was for my tuition. We'll figure it out," she said, like we always said, like figuring things out meant pretending they'd solve themselves. "You're part of this family, Ava. We all pitch in." Pitch in? Like I was another pair of hands on the assembly line. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there, fingers curled into fists at my sides. "You could have asked." "I didn't think you'd mind," she said, finally turning to face me. "You're so independent. I knew you'd understand." That word again, understand. Like my feelings were a luxury she couldn't afford. I walked out of the room, my pulse pounding in my ears. In my bedroom, if you could still call it that, I pulled my suitcase from under the bed. It wasn't big. Just enough for clothes, a few books, the photo I'd hidden behind the bookshelf of me and my dad at the park when I was 6. I didn't cry, not even when I zipped it up. Instead, I took out my phone and texted Rachel. "Me. Is your couch still available?" Rachel. Always. What's going on? Me. I'll explain later. Can you pick me up? Rachel. Leaving now. 15 minutes later, I stood on the porch with my suitcase. No one had noticed I packed. No one had asked why I wasn't eating dinner. Eli was somewhere in the basement with his headphones on. Kaylee was posting selfies from her new phone. And Mom? Still folding towels like nothing had shifted. Rachel's car pulled into the driveway. She didn't honk, just waited. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted Mom to stop me, to ask why I was leaving, to fight for me in some way. But the door stayed closed. Rachel rolled down the window. You okay? I nodded. But inside, I felt hollow. Like something had been taken that had nothing to do with money. As the car pulled away, I looked straight ahead, not back. We drove in silence for a few blocks before Rachel spoke again. You don't have to talk. Just know you're safe now. I nodded again, this time with a little more weight. The car smelled like lavender and old French fries. Her dash had a small, stuffed llama I gave her when I was 12. It bobbed with every turn. Somewhere along the way, I reached into my hoodie pocket and felt a crumpled paper. I unfolded it slowly, unsure what it was. A note. My handwriting. I must have written it weeks ago, maybe longer. Someday I'll leave this house quietly. Today is someday. I stared at the words as Rachel turned onto her street. The letters looked shaky, like whoever wrote them had been scared, but also ready. She parked and reached for my bag, but I shook my head. I got it. We walked up to her apartment, where the porch light flickered and the mailbox leaned sideways. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. Inside, she handed me a blanket without saying a word. We ordered pizza. She let me choose the movie, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe the world wasn't something to escape from. Maybe it was something I could build again, piece by piece. At Rachel's apartment, no one yelled. That was the first thing I noticed. No stomping feet, no slammed doors, no conversations where people talked over each other just to win. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. Not always warm, but safe. It was so unfamiliar, it almost scared me. Rachel didn't hover. She gave me a set of house keys, a drawer in the bathroom, and a note on the fridge that read, You live here. Not crash, not visit. Live. There were rules, but gentle ones. Dishes got washed by the end of the night. We alternated taking out the trash. Sundays were for resetting, laundry, grocery list, and a walk, even if we didn't feel like it. Her apartment was small, a second-floor unit with creaky floors and mismatched mugs, but every corner felt intentional. String lights dangled above the kitchen window. Books were stacked on every surface, some with bookmarks made of receipts or gum wrappers. Plants lined the sill, some drooping, some thriving. Kind of like us. Winter in Spokane can be ruthless. That first January, the snow came down in heavy silence, covering everything like a second skin. Inside, we drank peppermint tea and watched reruns of old sitcoms where nothing truly bad ever happened. Sometimes we'd laugh until we couldn't breathe. Other nights, we'd just sit in the same room, reading different books, and let the quiet hum between us. I used to think peace would feel louder, I told her once. She didn't respond right away, just looked at me over the rim of her chipped mug and said, Maybe it gets louder the longer you sit in it. I picked up part-time hours again. Nothing big, just a local bookstore cafe that smelled like cinnamon and old pages. The manager, Terrence, was soft-spoken and wore thick glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. He didn't ask about my life. He just trained me on the register and let me take home paperbacks that were too damaged to sell. In the spring, Rachel slid a course catalog across the kitchen table. Just look, she said, and I did. That's how I ended up in Mr. Harmon's evening class on communication and self-advocacy. It sounded boring on paper. In reality, it was the first time someone gave me language for things I thought were just feelings I had to swallow. Mr. Harmon was in his 60s, gray hair tied in a low ponytail, voice calm enough to soothe a storm. He opened every class with a quote and ended with 5 minutes of silence. So you can hear yourself think, he said. One evening, the topic was boundaries. He wrote in block letters across the whiteboard. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and still love myself. Someone snorted in the back. Mr. Harmon didn't flinch. We broke into groups and discussed what boundaries looked like. One woman said it meant not answering calls after 9 p.m. A teenager in the back said it was deleting his dad's number. I didn't speak. I just wrote. That night, I copied something into the margin of my notebook. Knowing your worth doesn't mean shouting it. It means staying. He'd said that earlier, almost as a throwaway line, but it stuck. It rattled around in my head all week. At work, when a customer snapped at me for messing up their order, I smiled without shrinking. At home, when Rachel forgot to replace the milk again, I teased her instead of bottling it up. It felt small, but revolutionary. We started a tradition that spring. Friday nights with the cheapest ramen we could find, soft pajamas, and old sitcoms with laugh tracks. Sometimes we'd pause the show just to tell each other the dumbest things we'd seen that week. There were nights we laughed until the tea went cold. Healing didn't look like breakthroughs. It looked like soft things done repeatedly. It looked like Rachel handing me a second bowl of noodles without asking if I was still hungry. It looked like plants getting watered, even if they didn't bloom right away. In one class, Mr. Harmon handed back a worksheet. Mine had a sentence at the bottom I'd forgotten I'd scribbled. I am not a rescue project. He didn't say anything, just placed the paper on my desk, tapped it gently with his finger, and gave a small nod. That moment landed somewhere deep. Not loud, not flashy, just solid. That night, I took the quote I'd written earlier and taped it to Rachel's fridge, just below her magnet shaped like a cow. Knowing your worth doesn't mean shouting it. It means staying. I didn't put it there to remind her. I put it there to remind me. Because something was starting to stir again. Small, slow, but certain. A part of me that remembered I was more than what I'd escaped, that I could shape something new, something quiet, and call it mine. It was late August, one of those deceptively calm afternoons when the sun is kind, but not warm, and the breeze makes you think something good might happen. I was watering the succulents on my windowsill when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Hi, Ava. Mom's voice came through, brittle and overly casual. It's been a while. I froze, watering can still tilted, droplets spilling onto the floor. Hi, I said, guarded. How are you? Still working at that marketing place? Yeah, I replied. I'm good. Silence. Then she cleared her throat. So, Kaylee's starting her master's this fall. She's been trying the dorms, but it's been stressful, loud, not ideal for focus. You know how she is, sensitive. I didn't answer. She found this great little apartment near campus, she continued, voice softening into her old pleading tone. Only $1,500 a month. It's perfect for studying. And there it was. You're doing well now, right? We were hoping you could help. Just $1,000 a month. Like it was nothing. Like what she did before hadn't cost me years of clawing my way back to stability. Mom, I said, calm but firm. I'm not paying for Kaylee's apartment. The silence that followed was sharp, like a dropped dish. I'm not asking for the whole thing, she said quickly. Just a portion. You're part of this family. We help each other. I let the words hang. She didn't even hear herself. You didn't help me, I said. You took everything I had when I needed it most. That's not fair. Neither was draining my savings. Her voice faltered. Gary and I did what we had to. We were struggling. I was 18. Another pause. She's your sister. She's not, I replied. She's your husband's daughter. You made your choices. Now live with them. I hung up. My hands shook, but my chest didn't feel hollow the way it once might have. It felt steady, like I had a spine made of all the moments I'd survived in silence. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Gary. I let it go to voicemail. He called twice more before texting. This isn't about money. It's about being part of a family. Don't turn your back. I didn't answer. Later that evening, Kaylee's name popped up. Her text was brief. It's not that much. You're being dramatic. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they weren't surprising. Kaylee had always lived in a world padded with assumptions. She didn't know the cost of things that weren't handed to her. I stared at her message for a long time. Then I deleted it. The next morning, I got a call from Uncle Ron. We hadn't spoken in over a year. "Hey, kiddo," he began, too cheerful. "Hi," I said, wary. "Your mom's been upset. Says you won't help with Kaylee. Wanted me to talk to you. You know, smooth things out." "She told you what happened with my college fund?" I asked. A pause. "She said it was a misunderstanding." I almost laughed. "She took my future and gave it to someone else. That wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice." Ron sighed. "Family's messy, but you've always been strong." There it was again. That word. Strong. Used like a reward. Used like a reason. "I'm done being strong so others can be irresponsible," I said. "Thanks for calling." I hung up. That night, my phone buzzed again. Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through, shakier than before. "Maybe you were never really part of us. Maybe that's why this doesn't mean anything to you. I hope you can live with yourself." I played it once, then again. Then I deleted it, slowly, deliberately, like I was deleting the last piece of a script that no longer fit. Afterwards, I sat on the couch with a blanket around my legs and closed my laptop. The apartment was still, the air filled with the faint scent of lemongrass from a candle Rachel had given me months ago. I poured myself a cup of tea and let it steep longer than usual. It wasn't about the apartment. It was about control. It was about the tether they thought they still had on me. But that cord? I'd cut it. I blocked Mom's number, then Gary's, then Kaylee's. I took a deep breath and let the silence settle. A few days later, I printed out the voicemail transcript. Just once. Rachel came over that evening, holding 2 pints of ice cream and her old denim jacket. We sat on the balcony, the city lights flickering below us. "I want to burn it," I said, holding up the paper. She didn't ask which one. She just nodded and handed me the matchbox from her bag. We lit it together, watched the flame curl the edges until it devoured every word. No drama, no speeches, just fire. Rachel leaned back, exhaling softly. "You okay?" I nodded. The truth was, I didn't know if I felt free, but I knew I wasn't afraid. She looked smaller. That was my first thought as I stepped into the coffee shop and saw her by the window. Not in the literal sense, though maybe that too, but in presence, in posture, in the way her coat folded around her like it was trying to hold her up. It had been 2 years since I last heard her voice. She didn't see me right away. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. I noticed the chipped nail polish, the trembling thumb rubbing against the ceramic like she was trying to find comfort in its warmth. I walked over. Her eyes lifted. She smiled, unsure. "Ava," she said softly. I nodded and sat down. No hug, no pleasantries, just that strange quiet that falls between people who've said too little for too long. The coffee shop was nothing special. Secondhand chairs, flickering overhead light, a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated since last fall. But it was neutral ground. Halfway between my life and hers, a place where the air could hold hard words and not crack. "Thank you for coming," she said, barely above a whisper. I waited. She looked down at her hands. "I wasn't sure you'd show." I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. After a moment, she exhaled. "I know I don't deserve it, Ava. Any of it. Your time, your forgiveness." I looked out the window. A man passed by with a dog wearing a tiny sweater. Behind them, the sky was turning that late November gray, quiet, heavy, almost honest. "I chose wrong," she said finally. "Again and again. I see that now, and I'm sorry." I pushed away the one person who stayed. I turned back to her then, really looked. There were new lines around her mouth, a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the woman who took my money and told me I was part of the family. She wasn't the woman who told me strength meant silence. She was just someone trying to say something a decade too late. I'm not angry anymore, I said. But I'm sad. She blinked, caught off guard. I'm sad you never saw me, I continued. Not really. She didn't try to interrupt. She nodded, slow and small, like the truth was too heavy to carry, but too real to drop. We sat there in silence again. It wasn't peaceful, but it wasn't tense either. Just quiet. Like two people acknowledging something that had already ended a long time ago. There were no promises. No let's start over. No reaching for hands or desperate apologies. When I stood to leave, she didn't stop me. Take care of yourself, she said, voice trembling. You too. And that was it. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves danced across the sidewalk in erratic spirals. I zipped up my coat and took out my phone. The number she'd texted me from last week, the one with her new area code. I opened it, hovered for a second, and then deleted it. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt complete. I thought back to something Mr. Harmon once said in class, back when I was still figuring out how to breathe fully again. Forgiveness doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes, it's just peace. I didn't understand it then. Not really. But now, I did. Back at my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and hung up my coat. The light was soft, filtered through the linen curtains Rachel helped me hang when I moved in. My little space smelled like green tea and eucalyptus, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's expectations trailing in behind me. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the fridge. On it, still taped from 2 years ago, was the old quote from Mr. Harmon. Knowing your worth doesn't mean shouting it, it means staying. I reached for a new sticky note and wrote something fresh beneath it. Peace doesn't need witnesses. I pressed it beside the first quote. 2 small squares of truth, side by side. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle deep into my chest. And I realized something. I forgave her the moment I stopped waiting for her to say sorry. Maybe that was the real freedom I'd been saving for all along. That day at the cafe, when I walked away without anger, I realized it wasn't the apology I had needed. It was the clarity that I no longer did. For the first time, peace wasn't something I was chasing. It was simply where I stood. We don't always get the family we hoped for, but we can still build the home we need. Quiet, kind, and true. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about making things right with others. Sometimes, it's how we make things whole within ourselves. In a world full of noise, knowing when to choose silence can be its own kind of wisdom. If this story brought something up in you, an old memory, a quiet strength, or just a moment of reflection, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts. Let's keep sharing the stories that remind us we're not alone.